Mama Wolf took her dying pup to the hunter and begged him to save her. Then this happened. Marcus Ward never meant to become a legend in Silver Creek Village. He was just a hunter, like his father before him, providing meat for his community and pelts for the bitter winters. But life has a way of writing stories we never expect to tell. The day everything changed started like any other hunting trip. Marcus had tracked a massive elk through the northern forests, following prints that promised enough meat to feed half the village. The morning sky had been clear, giving no warning of the storm that would soon turn his world white. He remembered checking his powder horn, nearly full. His musket was loaded, his knife sharp. 20 years of experience told him this would be an easy hunt. Even when the first snowflakes began to fall, he wasn't worried. Marcus Ward knew these woods like he knew his own heartbeat. Or so he thought. The storm came without mercy. Within an hour, the gentle snowfall transformed into a howling blizzard that erased every landmark he trusted. The wind cut through his wool coat like icy knives, and the temperature plummeted so rapidly that his breath froze in his beard. Still, Marcus pressed on, convinced he could find his way back. That's when the accident happened. The ravine appeared out of nowhere, hidden beneath a deceptive blanket of snow. One moment he was walking, the next he was falling. The crack of his leg hitting rock echoed through the white silence, followed by his own muffled cry of pain. He tumbled, his body bouncing off frozen earth and stone before coming to rest at the bottom, his musket lost somewhere in the chaos. Pain shot through his right leg like liquid fire. Through blurry vision, he could see where the bone had torn through his trouser leg, blood staining the white snow crimson. His hunting pack was gone, scattered during the fall. All he had left was the knife at his belt and the clothes on his back. "Help!" he shouted, but the wind stole his voice. The storm raged on, indifferent to his suffering. Night was approaching, and with it, temperatures that no man could survive without shelter. Marcus knew the statistics. He'd heard the stories since childhood. In these mountains, a stranded man had perhaps 3 hours before hypothermia set in. Less, with an injury like his. Already, his thoughts were becoming sluggish, his fingers numb despite his gloves. He tried to crawl, dragging his broken leg through the snow. Each movement was agony, but staying still meant death. The blood trail he left behind should have worried him. These woods were home to predators far deadlier than him. But at that moment, freezing to death seemed a more pressing concern than becoming something's dinner. That's when he heard them. At first, he thought the sounds were just the wind playing tricks on his fading mind. But then he saw them, yellow eyes gleaming in the growing darkness, moving with purpose through the swirling snow. Wolves. Not just one or two, but an entire pack. Marcus reached for his knife with trembling fingers, knowing it would be useless against so many. He counted 7 shapes moving through the storm, their gray fur making them seem like living shadows. This, he thought, was nature's cruel joke, surviving the fall and the cold only to end up as wolf food. But something was wrong with this picture. The wolves weren't attacking. They moved in a circle around him, watching, assessing. Their behavior defied everything Marcus knew about wolf packs and injured prey. They should have been closing in for the kill, not maintaining this mysterious vigil. The largest wolf, a battle-scarred male with one torn ear, stepped forward. Marcus recognized him. This was the alpha he'd seen from a distance many times but never hunted. The beast was legendary among the villagers, known for his unusual size and the distinctive scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. Local children called him Ghost, though no one knew who started the name. Marcus raised his knife with a shaking hand, but the wolf didn't attack. Instead, it did something that would haunt Marcus's dreams for years to come. It sat down in the snow, just out of reach, and howled. Not an ordinary howl, but a specific pattern of sounds that was answered by the rest of the pack. Then, impossibly, Ghost stood and walked a few paces away, stopped, and looked back at Marcus. When Marcus didn't move, the wolf returned, gently gripped his sleeve with its teeth, and tugged. The message was clear: follow. Delirious from cold and blood loss, Marcus made a choice that defied all logic. He lowered his knife. If death was coming, he reasoned, it hardly mattered how it found him. Using his good leg and his arms, he began to crawl in the direction the wolf indicated. The pack moved with him, forming a loose circle that blocked the worst of the wind. Ghost led the way, stopping periodically to ensure Marcus kept pace. They traveled like this for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, until they reached the base of an ancient oak tree. There, hidden among its massive roots, was a den entrance. It wasn't very deep, but it was enough to block the wind. As Marcus dragged himself inside, he discovered the den was surprisingly warm, a natural shelter that had trapped what little heat the day had offered. The wolves didn't enter the den. Instead, they arranged themselves around the entrance, their bodies creating a wall of fur that kept the bitter cold at bay. Ghost himself lay closest to the opening, his massive body radiating heat like a living furnace. Marcus's last conscious thought before exhaustion claimed him was of the stories his grandmother used to tell, tales of wolves who were more than mere beasts, who understood debts and honor in ways humans had forgotten. As darkness took him, he wondered if perhaps those stories weren't just legends after all. He awoke to birdsong and sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. His leg throbbed, but he was alive, something that should have been impossible. The wolves were gone, leaving only tracks in the fresh snow as evidence they had ever existed. Using a broken branch as a crutch, Marcus managed to orient himself. The village was less than a mile away. He'd been much closer to home than he thought, but without the wolves' intervention, he would have wandered in the wrong direction until the cold claimed him. As he hobbled toward home, Marcus made a vow that would change his life forever. He would never hunt wolves again. More than that, he would become their secret guardian, protecting them from other hunters who didn't understand what he now knew, that there were mysteries in these woods far deeper than anyone suspected. 5 years had passed since that fateful night in the storm. Marcus Ward's leg had healed, though it still ached when rain was coming. The village had changed too, new faces, new houses, and new fears. A harsh winter had driven more settlers into their valley, bringing with them their own ideas about how to tame the wilderness. Marcus had kept his promise. Not only had he stopped hunting wolves, but he'd also become their silent protector. When other hunters spoke of tracking the pack, he'd casually mention seeing wolf signs in the opposite direction. When settlers complained about missing livestock, he'd help them build better fences instead of organizing hunting parties. Some in the village thought he'd gone soft after his accident. Others whispered that the cold had frozen his brain that night. Marcus let them talk. That spring evening started quietly enough. He sat on his porch, sharpening his knife, not for hunting wolves, but for the more mundane task of preparing the deer he'd caught earlier. The familiar rhythm of stone against steel always calmed his mind, helping him think. He was considering how to handle the latest problem in the village, Thomas Beck, a new settler with a hatred for wolves that bordered on obsession, when he heard it. A sound that made his hands freeze mid-stroke. A wolf's whimper, but not just any whimper. This was a sound of desperation, of last resorts. Marcus stood slowly, his knife forgotten. Through the gathering dusk, he saw a shape emerging from the tree line. His breath caught in his throat. It was a wolf, but not the proud, powerful creatures he remembered from that winter night. This one moved like a ghost of herself, ribs visible through matted fur, each step seemingly an effort of will. In her jaws, she carried something that made Marcus's heart stop, a wolf pup, limp as a rag doll. Only the slight movement of its chest showed it still lived. As the wolf drew closer, recognition hit him like a physical blow. He knew those distinctive markings, that unique pattern of gray and white fur. This was Luna, Ghost's mate, one of the wolves who had helped save his life. But Ghost wasn't with her. Marcus scanned the tree line, searching for the familiar scarred face, but saw nothing. A bad sign. Ghost would never let his mate approach a human alone unless something had happened to him. Luna stopped about 10 feet from the porch, swaying slightly from exhaustion. Her eyes, though clouded with fatigue, fixed on Marcus with an intelligence that made him shiver. Slowly, deliberately, she laid her pup on the ground. Then, doing something that defied every natural law Marcus knew, She nudged the tiny body toward him with her nose. "Oh, Luna," he whispered, using the name he'd given her years ago. "What happened to you?" The wolf's only response was to nudge her pup again, her message clear: "Help us." Marcus's mind raced. Taking in an injured wolf pup was madness. If the villagers found out, especially Thomas Beck, there would be consequences. But as he looked at Luna's desperate face, he remembered another night, another impossible choice made in the snow. He stepped off his porch slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. Luna watched him, muscles tense but holding her ground. As he got closer, he could see why. The pup was in bad shape. Its breathing was shallow, its tiny body hot with fever. That's when he noticed something else: Luna's own injuries. There was dried blood on her left flank, and she favored her right front paw. She'd been in a fight, a bad one. The pieces started falling into place: Ghost's absence, Luna's condition, the pup's illness. Something had gone terribly wrong in the forest. Just as Marcus knelt to examine the pup, a sound froze them both: voices on the road, coming closer. Luna's ears flattened, but she didn't run. Instead, she looked at Marcus with those intelligent eyes, and he understood. She couldn't carry her pup anymore. She was trusting him, completely and absolutely, with her child's life. "Quick," he whispered. "Hide in the woods. I'll take care of your little one." Luna hesitated for just a moment, touching her nose gently to her pup's head. Then she limped into the undergrowth, just as two figures rounded the bend in the road. Marcus scooped up the pup, tucking it inside his coat. The tiny body burned against his chest. The fever was worse than he'd thought. He straightened up just as Thomas Beck and young Will Harper came into view. "Evening, Ward," Beck called out, his voice carrying that edge of suspicion it always had these days. "Bit late to be out in your yard, isn't it?" Marcus forced himself to stay casual, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Just enjoying the spring air. Better than being cooped up inside." Beck's eyes narrowed, scanning the yard like he was looking for something specific. "Heard a strange noise just now. Sounded like a wolf. Probably just the wind in the pines," Marcus replied, patting his coat pocket where he kept his tobacco, trying to look natural while hiding the movement of the pup. "It plays tricks this time of evening." Will Harper, barely 16 and eager to please, piped up. "Mr. Beck says he saw wolf tracks near his property again. Big ones. Is that so?" Marcus kept his voice level, though his mind was racing. If Beck was tracking wolves, that might explain Luna's injuries. "Well, wolves tend to pass through these parts in spring. They rarely stay long." Beck spat into the dirt. "They stay long enough to kill livestock. Found one of my sheep dead last week. Throat torn out." He patted the rifle slung over his shoulder. "But I'm ready for them now. Got some special loads made up, iron shot mixed with silver. Old country recipe, guaranteed to bring down any predator." The pup shifted against Marcus's chest, and he coughed to cover any sound it might make. "Silver shot? Sounds expensive. Worth every penny to rid these woods of vermin," Beck growled. "You used to understand that, Ward. Before your accident." He said the last word like he didn't quite believe it was an accident at all. Marcus shrugged, fighting to keep his expression neutral. "A man learns things as he gets older. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get inside. Getting a bit of a chill." Beck stared at him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Come on, Will. Let's finish our patrol." As they walked away, Marcus heard him mutter, "Something's not right about that man. Not right at all." Only when their footsteps had faded did Marcus dare to breathe normally again. He looked toward the woods where Luna had hidden and whispered, "It's safe now. But you can't stay here. Beck's hunting, and he means business." A soft whine from the undergrowth told him Luna had understood. She emerged briefly, looked at him one more time, then melted back into the forest. She would return when she could. Marcus hurried inside, his mind already racing with plans. The pup needed help immediately, but he'd have to be careful. One wrong move, one slip in front of the wrong person, and both he and the wolves would pay a terrible price. As he laid the pup gently by the fire, he realized his life had just become infinitely more complicated. But looking at the tiny creature fighting for breath, he knew he had no choice. A debt was a debt, and this one went deeper than mere survival. Marcus had faced many challenges in his life: brutal winters, dangerous hunts, even that near-fatal night in the storm. But as he knelt beside the dying wolf pup, he realized this might be his greatest test yet. The tiny creature's breathing was labored, its body burning with fever, yet somehow still fighting for life with every shallow breath. "Come on, little one," he whispered, gently checking the pup's condition. Its eyes were crusted shut, gums pale, and when he felt its belly, he could tell it was severely dehydrated. But what worried him most was a small wound on its neck, barely visible beneath the fur. The skin around it was hot and swollen, infected. Marcus ran through his limited medical knowledge. He'd treated wounded animals before, mostly hunting dogs belonging to villagers, but never a wolf pup. The infection was the immediate threat, but the dehydration could kill just as surely. He needed help, but who could he trust? Old Sarah, the village healer, might know what to do. She kept to herself, living on the outskirts of town with her herbs and remedies. People called her a witch behind her back but still came knocking when modern medicine failed them. More importantly, she owed Marcus a favor. He'd kept hunters away from the patch of forest where she gathered her rare herbs. But leaving the pup alone was risky. Luna might return, and finding her baby gone could break the fragile trust between them. Plus, Beck was out there with his silver shot and suspicious mind. The wrong person seeing Marcus heading to old Sarah's cabin at night would start tongues wagging. A weak whimper from the pup decided him. Without proper medicine, the little one wouldn't last till morning. Marcus quickly built up his fire and created a nest of soft blankets near the hearth. He placed the pup there, tucking it in so it would stay warm. "I'll be back soon," he promised, hoping Luna could somehow hear him. "Keep fighting, little warrior." The night was clear and cold, stars sharp as icicles overhead. Marcus stuck to the shadows, taking the long way around the village to avoid being seen. His bad leg ached with each step, reminding him of another desperate night years ago. Old Sarah's cabin appeared ahead, a single candle burning in the window despite the late hour. Before Marcus could knock, the door creaked open. "Took you long enough," Sarah said, her voice rough as bark. She was a tiny woman, bent with age, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "Been expecting you since sunset." Marcus blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "The wolves told me," she interrupted, then cackled at his expression. "Or maybe I just saw Luna limping past my cabin earlier, carrying something precious." Come in. Tell me everything." Inside, the cabin smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. Bundles of plants hung from the ceiling, and shelves lined with bottles and jars covered every wall. A large black cat watched Marcus from its perch on a bookshelf, its yellow eyes unnervingly similar to a wolf's. As Marcus explained the situation, Sarah began pulling items from various shelves: dried leaves, powders, tiny bottles of liquid. She worked as she listened, grinding herbs with practiced movements. "Silver shot, you say?" She shook her head. "That Beck's a fool playing with things he doesn't understand. Real silver shot would cost more than his farm's worth. But even iron can do plenty of damage. Can you help the pup?" Sarah stopped grinding and fixed him with a stern look. "I can give you medicine for the infection and fever. But saving that pup? That'll take more than herbs," Marcus swore. "You'll need courage, cunning, and luck." She began packaging her remedies in small paper twists. "And you'll need to understand what you're really dealing with." "What do you mean?" "Those aren't ordinary wolves, as you well know. Ghost and Luna, there's something older. Something from the days when the barrier between our world and theirs was thinner." She handed him the packages. "This isn't just about repaying a debt anymore. You've been chosen as their guardian, whether you wanted the job or not." A scratching at the door made them both turn. Sarah's cat had moved to the window and was growling softly. Through the glass, Marcus caught a glimpse of gray fur. Luna had followed him. "She's checking on you," Sarah said softly. "Making sure you're getting help for her little one. Give her a sign." Marcus moved to the window and held up the medicine packages where Luna could see them. The wolf's eyes met his, and she nodded, an eerily human gesture, before disappearing into the shadows. "The pup needs more than medicine," Sarah continued, pressing a small bottle into his hand. "This is goat's milk mixed with honey and herbs. Few drops every hour. Clean the wound with this." She handed him another bottle. "And put this salve on it. But most importantly, the pup needs to know it's not alone. Talk to it. Let it feel your heart beating. Sometimes the will to live is the strongest medicine of all." As Marcus turned to leave, Sarah caught his arm. "One more thing. The next few days, keep your shotgun loaded. Not for the wolves, for whatever drove them to trust a human with their pup. Something wicked is stirring in these woods, Marcus. Something that could finish a wolf-like ghost." The trek back to his cabin seemed longer, Sarah's words weighing heavy on his mind. The night had grown colder, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, mournful sound. Inside, the pup hadn't moved from its nest of blankets, but its breathing seemed slightly stronger. Marcus set to work immediately, cleaning the infected wound as gently as he could. The pup whimpered but didn't struggle, as if it somehow knew he was trying to help. "Your mama's quite something," he told the pup as he applied Sarah's salve. "Braver than any wolf I've ever seen. And your papa?" He paused, remembering Ghost's proud bearing. "Well, he's a legend in these parts. You come from strong stock, little one. Too strong to give up now." Using an eyedropper he'd bought months ago for cleaning his rifle, Marcus carefully fed the pup a few drops of Sarah's milk mixture. To his relief, it swallowed weakly. A sound outside made him freeze, footsteps on his porch. Then a knock, firm and commanding. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of Thomas Beck's broad shoulders. The pup chose that moment to let out a tiny, high-pitched whine. Marcus's heart stopped. In the quiet night, with Beck just outside, that sound might as well have been a thunderclap. Marcus's mind raced as another knock echoed through the cabin. The pup whimpered again, softer this time, but in the stillness of the night, even that tiny sound seemed deafening. With movements born of desperate necessity, he scooped up the pup, blankets and all, and quickly tucked the bundle into a large copper pot on his shelf. It wasn't ideal, but the thick metal would muffle any sounds. "Coming!" he called out, hastily sweeping Sarah's medicines into a drawer. He grabbed a half-empty bottle of whiskey from his cupboard and splashed some on his shirt before opening the door, letting the strong scent mask any lingering smell of herbs or wolf. Beck stood on the porch, his massive frame silhouetted against the starlit sky. Behind him, Will Harper shifted nervously from foot to foot, clutching his own rifle. Two more men Marcus recognized as Beck's farmhands waited at the bottom of the steps, both armed. "Took you long enough, Ward," Beck growled, his nose wrinkling at the whiskey smell. "Having a private celebration?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, doing his best to appear slightly drunk. "Just nursing an old wound. Cold nights make my leg ache something fierce." He took a deliberate swig from the bottle. "What brings 4 armed men to my door at this hour?" Beck's eyes swept past him into the cabin. "Found something interesting near my property. Thought you might want to see it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of fabric, dark blue wool, stained with blood. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. It was a piece of his own coat, torn off during his scramble to save the pup earlier. "Caught on a thorn bush," Beck continued, watching Marcus's face carefully. "Right next to some mighty peculiar tracks. Wolf tracks, heading straight toward your cabin." Will Harper piped up, eager as always to contribute. "And we heard." "Quiet, boy," Beck snapped, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "Well, Ward? Care to explain why a wolf might be making social calls to your place?" From inside the copper pot came the faintest scratch of claws on metal. Marcus coughed loudly to cover it. "You've been drinking too much of that silver shot nonsense, Beck. Wolves don't make social calls. Then you won't mind if we take a look around." Beck took a step forward, but Marcus held his ground in the doorway. "Actually, I do mind. It's late, I'm tired, and unless you've got a warrant from the sheriff, my home is my business. Marcus straightened up, letting the drunk act fade. Besides, shouldn't you be more worried about what made those blood stains? Seems to me an injured wolf is more dangerous than an imaginary one visiting my cabin. Beck's hand tightened on his rifle. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, from somewhere in the forest, a wolf's howl split the night. It was Luna's voice, and there was an urgency to it that Marcus had never heard before. The effect on Beck's group was immediate. Will Harper nearly jumped out of his skin, and the farmhands exchanged nervous glances. Even Beck took an instinctive step back from the sound. "That came from near your farm, Mr. Beck," one of the farmhands called out. "Sounded mighty close to the sheep pen." Beck hesitated, clearly torn between his suspicion of Marcus and his desire to protect his livestock. Another howl, closer this time, made the decision for him. "This isn't over, Ward," he snarled. "We'll stay here. Watch the cabin. The rest of you, with me." He jabbed a finger at Marcus. "If I find out you're helping those beasts..." "You'll what?" Marcus asked quietly. "Shoot me with silver bullets? Go tend to your sheep, Beck. And be careful out there. Something's got those wolves riled up tonight." They watched Beck and his men hurry down the path, loading their rifles as they went. When they were out of earshot, Will Harper shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Ward? Can I come in for a bit? It's awful cold out here." Marcus studied the boy. Will had always been different from the other young men in the village, quieter, more thoughtful. And there was something in his eyes now, something that suggested he might understand. "You're supposed to be watching me," Marcus reminded him. Will managed a shaky smile. "I can watch better from inside. Besides, I heard what you did for my sister last winter, bringing her medicine when the snow was too deep for anyone else to make the trip. Ma says we owe you." Marcus considered for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, then. But what you see stays between us." As Will entered, Marcus closed the door and walked to the copper pot. The pup had been quiet, but he could hear its labored breathing. Carefully, he lifted the bundle out. Will's eyes went wide. "Is that a wolf pup?" "Yes. Sick and injured. Its mother brought it to me for help." Marcus watched the boy's face carefully. "Still want to stay?" To his surprise, Will set his rifle aside and moved closer, eyes full of wonder rather than fear. "It's so small. Is it going to die?" "Not if I can help it. But I need to give it medicine, and I could use an extra pair of hands." "Your hands if you're willing. But understand, helping me means lying to Beck. You ready for that responsibility?" Will was quiet for a long moment, looking at the tiny pup. Then he rolled up his sleeves. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour, they worked together to treat the pup. Will proved to have gentle hands and a calm demeanor that seemed to soothe the sick animal. As they worked, Marcus told him the story of that winter night years ago, of Ghost and his pack, of debts and honor. "Beck's wrong about the wolves," Will said finally, watching the pup drink from the eyedropper. "They're not mindless killers. This little one, its mama, they're just trying to survive, same as us." A scratching at the window made them both turn. Luna was there, watching them work with her intelligent eyes. To Marcus's amazement, she showed no distress at seeing Will helping with her pup. If anything, she seemed pleased. "She knows," Will whispered. "She knows who's helping and who's not." Suddenly, Luna's ears pricked up. She turned her head sharply toward the forest, then vanished into the darkness. Moments later, they heard it, gunshots in the distance, followed by Beck's voice raised in triumph. The pup stirred restlessly in its blankets, as if sensing something was wrong. Marcus and Will exchanged worried glances. Whatever was happening out there in the darkness, it would change everything. The time for secrets was running out. Dawn broke over Silver Creek Village with an eerie red glow that seemed to set the snow-capped mountains on fire. Marcus hadn't slept, spending the night tending to the pup while Will kept watch. The boy had proved himself invaluable, not just with his helping hands but with his quiet determination. Now, As the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, they heard the commotion outside. "They're back," Will whispered, peering through a gap in the curtains. "And they've got something, oh no." Marcus's heart sank as he joined Will at the window. Beck and his men were marching down the village's main street, drawing a crowd. Behind them, dragged on a makeshift sledge, was a massive gray wolf. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the silver-streaked fur, the battle-scarred face. "Ghost. He's still breathing." Will grabbed Marcus's arm. "Look, his chest is moving." He was right. Ghost was alive, but badly wounded. Blood matted his fur, and one of his legs was clearly broken. Beck had shot him, but somehow the great wolf had survived. "Beck will finish him off in front of the whole village," Marcus growled. "Make a show of it to stir up more fear." As if confirming his words, Beck's voice boomed out across the square. "See what's been terrorizing our livestock? The biggest wolf I've ever seen, a monster. And where there's one, there's more. I say we form a hunting party, clear these woods once and for all." Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Beck knew how to use it. "We have to do something," Will pleaded. "They'll kill him." Marcus looked at the sick pup, finally sleeping peacefully after a night of struggle. Its fever had broken just before dawn, a good sign, but it was still too weak to travel. And somewhere in the forest, Luna was waiting, probably torn between helping her mate and protecting her child. "Watch the pup," Marcus said, grabbing his coat. "If anyone comes, hide it in the root cellar. There's a false wall behind the wine barrels." "What are you going to do?" "Something stupid." Marcus paused at the door. "Will, if this goes wrong, get the pup to old Sarah. She'll know what to do." The morning air was bitter cold as Marcus limped toward the gathering crowd. His bad leg screamed in protest, but he ignored it. Beck stood over Ghost's body, rifle raised for the finishing shot. "Wait!" Marcus's voice cut through the murmurs. The crowd parted as he approached, some backing away as if his rumored madness might be catching. "Before you finish him, hear me out." Beck lowered his rifle slightly, more amused than concerned. "Come to speak for your wolf friends, Ward? Come to speak for reason," Marcus countered, moving to stand between Beck and Ghost. "You want to know why wolves are coming closer to the village? Look around. We've pushed into their hunting grounds, cut down their forests, finished their prey. They're not monsters, they're hungry, same as any creature would be. They're killers," Beck spat. "They took 3 of my sheep last week." "Did they?" Marcus asked quietly. "Or did something else? Something that makes wolves desperate enough to risk coming near humans?" He turned to address the crowd. "How many of you have actually seen a wolf finish your livestock? Not just tracks, not just rumors, but seen it with your own eyes?" Uncertain glances were exchanged. No one spoke up. "I have seen wolves hunt," Marcus continued. "They're careful. Efficient. They don't leave half-eaten carcasses or waste meat. But that's what we've been finding, isn't it? Something else is out there, something that kills for sport rather than food. And now you've shot the one creature strong enough to keep it away." A low growl rumbled from Ghost's throat, as if confirming Marcus's words. The great wolf's eyes opened, fixing on Beck with a gaze that made the man step back involuntarily. "You're crazy, Ward," Beck said, but there was a tremor in his voice. "This beast was practically on my doorstep. Because something chased him there." Old Sarah's voice cut through the tension. The crowd parted again as she hobbled forward, her black cat following at her heels. "Something that's been watching us all, growing bolder as we waste time fighting among ourselves." As if summoned by her words, an unearthly howl echoed from the forest, not the familiar voice of a wolf, but something different. Something wrong. The sound made the horses tied nearby rear in terror, and several people crossed themselves. Ghost tried to rise, his powerful muscles trembling with the effort. Without thinking, Marcus knelt beside him, supporting his weight. The wolf accepted his help without hesitation, and together they faced the tree line. There, in the shadows between the trees, yellow eyes gleamed, Not the warm amber of wolf eyes, but a sickly, phosphorescent glow. Something was coming, something that moved like smoke between the branches. "Silver's shot won't help you now, back," old Sarah called out. "This is something older than wolves, older than silver. Something that's been sleeping in these mountains since before our grandfather's time." The thing in the forest moved closer, and people began to scream. But Marcus barely heard them. He was focused on Ghost, on the way the wolf's muscles bunched beneath his hands, preparing for one last fight. "You're not alone this time, old friend," Marcus whispered. From the corner of his eye, he saw Will emerge from his cabin, the pup safely hidden away. The boy carried Marcus's old hunting rifle, loaded with regular shot, useless against whatever was coming, but a comfort nonetheless. Then Luna appeared, materializing from the shadows like a spirit. She took her place on Ghost's other side, her own wounds forgotten as she faced the darkness with her mate. One by one, more wolves emerged from the forest, the entire pack, coming together for their leaders. The village watched in awe as humans and wolves stood together, united against a common enemy. But Marcus knew this was more than just an alliance of convenience. This was about loyalty, about debts repaid and promises kept. About the thin line between civilization and wilderness, and the courage to stand in between. As the horror in the forest prepared to charge, Marcus gripped his rifle tighter and smiled grimly. The real test of loyalty was about to begin. The creature that emerged from the forest defied description. It moved like liquid shadow, its form shifting between wolf and bear, mountain lion and something far older. Ancient legends spoke of such beings, spirit hunters that fed not just on flesh, but on fear itself. The kind of stories grandmothers whispered about but never in daylight. As it fully revealed itself, even Beck's bravado crumbled. His silver shot and iron bullets suddenly seemed as useful as throwing pebbles at a thunderstorm. The thing was massive, bigger than any natural predator, with too many teeth and eyes that burned with an unholy hunger. "Don't run," old Sarah's voice cut through the rising panic. "That's what it wants. Stand together, all of you." The villagers, to their credit, held their ground. Perhaps they understood that running would only trigger the creature's hunting instinct. Or maybe they were simply too terrified to move. Marcus felt Ghost trembling against him, not with fear, but with rage. The great wolf had clearly faced this monster before. Those wounds hadn't come from Beck's bullets. Luna snarled, a sound filled with protective fury. Somewhere in Marcus's cabin, her pup was fighting for life, and she wasn't about to let this ancient evil threaten her family again. The rest of the pack spread out in a hunting formation that Marcus recognized from his years of observation. They were preparing for battle. "Will," Marcus called out, not taking his eyes off the creature. "Remember that story I told you about the old hunting technique? The one about driving prey into a trap?" "Yes, sir," Will replied, his young voice steady despite his fear. "The double circle method. Good lad. Get everyone to form 2 rings, outer ring facing out, inner ring facing in. No gaps, no weak points." As Will began organizing the villagers, Marcus addressed the wolves. "You know what to do. Just like you did for me in the storm, work together." The creature attacked without warning, moving faster than anything its size should be able to move. But the wolves were ready. As it lunged for the villagers, the pack split into 2 groups, forcing it to divide its attention. Ghost and Luna, despite their injuries, moved with perfect coordination, snapping at its flanks while the younger wolves harried it from behind. Marcus had positioned himself in the outer ring of villagers, his rifle ready. "Wait for the clear shot," he shouted as people raised their weapons. "Don't waste ammunition." The creature whirled and struck, catching one of the younger wolves with a massive paw. The wolf yelped but rolled with the blow, allowing 2 others to dart in and bite at the monster's legs. It was like watching a perfect dance, each wolf knowing exactly where to be and when to strike. Beck, who had ended up in the inner ring, finally found his courage. "The eyes!" he shouted. "Aim for its eyes!" For once, Marcus agreed with him. "Will, get Sarah's herbs. The ones in my drawer. Quickly!" As Will darted toward the cabin, the creature suddenly changed tactics. It reared up to its full height, becoming something almost human in shape but twisted, wrong. A sound emerged from it that wasn't quite a roar and wasn't quite a scream, a sound that made blood run cold and minds go blank with primal terror. Several villagers broke ranks, their nerve failing. The creature surged toward the gap, but Ghost was there, placing his massive body between the monster and its prey. Luna flanked him, and together they held the line, giving the humans time to reform their circle. Will returned with Sarah's herbs, and the old woman quickly began crushing them in her hands, speaking words in a language Marcus didn't recognize. The pungent scent cut through the creature's otherworldly stench. "Fire!" Sarah called out. "We need fire!" Marcus understood. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out his tinderbox, the same one he'd failed to use that night in the storm. With trembling fingers, he struck the flint, setting Sarah's herbs ablaze. The smoke that rose was thick and green, carrying a scent of summer meadows and clean winter nights. The creature recoiled from the smoke, its form becoming less stable. Where the green haze touched it, its shadow flesh seemed to dissolve. The wolves pressed their advantage, herding it toward the thickest part of the smoke. "Now!" Marcus roared. "Everyone shoot together!" Rifles thundered in unison. The creature screamed, a sound of rage and disbelief rather than pain. But in that moment of weakness, Ghost made his move. The great wolf launched himself at the monster's throat, Luna moving in perfect synchronization to hamstring its back legs. The rest of the pack struck from all sides, and the creature's form began to unravel like smoke in a strong wind. As it thrashed in its death throes, it fixed its burning eyes on Marcus. In that gaze, he saw something ancient and cruel, something that had watched humans evolve from prey into predators with bitter resentment. Then Ghost's jaws closed on its throat one final time, and the thing dissolved into nothing more than shadow and spite, leaving behind only a scorched patch of earth and a lingering scent of Sarah's herbs. The silence that followed was profound. Humans and wolves stood together, breathing hard, barely believing what they had witnessed. Then, from Marcus's cabin, came a sound that made every heart lift, a high, clear howl. The pup had survived. Luna's ears pricked up, and she looked at Marcus with an expression that could only be described as gratitude. Ghost, his wounds still bleeding but his pride undiminished, limped to Marcus's side and pressed his head against the hunter's leg, a gesture of respect between equals. Beck was the first to break the silence. "Ward," he said quietly, "I think I owe you an apology." "You too," he added, looking at Ghost. "I was wrong about a lot of things." Old Sarah cackled. "Amazing how clear things become when you face down a nightmare together." She patted her cat, which had somehow remained calm throughout the entire battle. "Though some nightmares need to be faced so we can wake up to a better morning." In the days that followed, things changed in Silver Creek Village. The wolves were no longer seen as enemies but as guardians of the forest's edge. Ghost and Luna's pup grew strong under Marcus's care, though they visited often even after it rejoined the pack. Will became Marcus's apprentice, learning not just about hunting, but about the delicate balance between wilderness and civilization. As for Marcus, he no longer felt the weight of his debt to the wolves. That had been transformed into something deeper, a partnership, a bridge between two worlds. On quiet nights, he would sit on his porch and listen to the wolves sing to the moon, their voices carrying ancient stories of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that form when different souls stand together against the darkness. And sometimes, when the wind was right, he could have sworn he heard Ghost howl leading the chorus, still standing guard over the boundaries between what was wild and what was tame, protecting both worlds from the shadows that lurked in between.